Hi my fellow weirdos, it's Ariel, and today I wanted to give you an end of the year video, of which I've already tried to film this yesterday, and I didn't like how it came out. I also wasn't in the best of mood, so we're redoing it today. And first thing I want to say is, I just haven't read that many books this year, so I am not capable of giving you a end of the year best of list like many other book channels. I've only read 12 books this year. And if you have watched my channel or know me personally, you know that this is very odd for me. Last year, I believe it was 83 that I read looking back at my history. And the year before that, it was somewhere from 170 to 180 for the past 2 years before that. So very steep decline that we're seeing, which is not surprising considering that I started school again and I will hopefully be graduating at the end of 2024. So yeah, that is one of the explanations for the very steep drop off. The other, that if you've been keeping up with my random sort of miscellaneous videos that I've been kind of doing, is that I discovered that I'm autistic at the ripe old age of 29 years old. And as you might imagine, this is quite a complete overhaul of your being and identity, essentially, to find this out at such a late age in life. So for those of you who are still following for the book stuff, I wanted to make a video just kind of wrapping up the 12 or so books that I read this year. So let's go through these rather quickly. A lot of the ones that I ended up reading were about autism, naturally, but I'm going to kind of go through firstly the ones that I read that were not about autism. The first one is I, Eternal Child, and this is by the artist Egon Schiele. And as you can see, this is a book of his paintings and poems, and I was intrigued by this because I did an IB art project of some sort in high school on this artist, so I recognized him. Also, his painting, The Embrace, I believe it's called, is one of my favorite paintings of all time. I absolutely love it. But I was interested in his poetry because I wasn't aware that he drew any, but he has this series, like this kind of ragdoll sort of thing going on. And he always draws himself really like skeletal, as you can see. And I will put a picture of the one poem in this collection that really stood out to me. I ended up just giving this 3 stars, so kind of a meh, but that one poem in particular I did really like. Okay, the other kind of coffee table book that I read this year is another one I picked up from the thrift store, and this is called American Junk. And essentially the premise of this book is that the author interviews different people about their, like, sort of salvaged collections, whether that's flea markets, thrift stores, that kind of thing. And this is an older book, has some very beautiful photos that kind of remind me of an I Spy spread, like if you guys remember the I Spy books. This is giving me kind of, yeah, 94, a 90s vibe, so perhaps that's why, sort of the same era, but essentially just going into people's houses and showing you full color photos of their collections or rooms and what they're decorated with, which is intriguing as somebody who obviously like enjoys the process of collecting and searching and finding. Again, this was just kind of a meh for me. I wouldn't really recommend like reading through every little bit of this book, more so just looking through it for the photos. The other book I read is a poetry book, and this was Your Wound / My Garden by Alok. And again, this is another one that I give 3 stars, so just kind of a meh for me. If I remember correctly, a lot of these poems were about grief and sort of COVID and perhaps also a breakup. I can't entirely remember, so don't quote me on that one, but yeah. One of the interesting things about their poetry collections that I really like is that they will have photos of their outfits that they've put together and sort of interspersed between the poems, and I really like that. That's really creative. I've never seen anything like that in a poetry book that I've read before, so that's something that really stands out to me about their work in particular and really inspired me a lot when I was editing like the chapbook that I was trying to like submit places. It kind of made me ask the question, like, what is my unique thing that I bring to this collection? Like, what can I add that will set my collection apart from others? So it really got me thinking in that way. Another one I read, again, another kind of coffee table-ish book called Patterns, New Surface Design. And this was one that I've been lugging around with me for years, and I ended up donating it when I got done with it. But it was just different patterns by different artists. Again, nothing particularly remarkable. I gave it 3 stars. I love patterns, like, don't get me wrong, you probably tell by the stuff behind me and kind of the stuff I wear sometimes, but yeah, freaking love patterns, but it was nothing I felt like I needed to keep. Most recent book I read is called How Sex Changed the Internet and the Internet Changed Sex, which I was just looking for some nonfiction to listen to on audio, and I do have kind of somewhat of a special interest in human sexuality. Like, I enjoy books that are talking about kind of analyzing and studying like just human sexuality. And I couldn't tell you why. I don't I don't know where it comes from. I'm nosy, I guess. And so I really enjoyed this book. I can't explain to you the little intricacies and details, but essentially like sexuality and role playing has kind of been a thing as long as the internet's been a thing, even when, you know, back in these old fashioned forums and before like the graphics were great, and and some of these things really drove a lot of the development of the internet, which obviously it's in the title, but it was fascinating. It held my attention. It was fast paced. It was interesting. That's really all I can tell you. I did give that 4 stars, so I would recommend it. Okay, now I'm gonna try to go through the books that I read on autism specifically, which were quite a few. The first one is The Reason I Jump, The Inner Voice of a 13-Year-Old Boy with Autism, which is probably one of the first autism books I ever saw and read. It's quite popular. I wanted to sort of reread or revisit some of the popular autism books that I remembered reading like years and years ago before I had a channel, but when I read them, nothing about them stood out to me as like, this is something I connect with. I am also autistic. I think because the spectrum is so vast that the high supports need experience is so vastly different from the low support needs that I feel like there was nothing there that I saw, related, or connected to. And so it just kind of breezed past me. And so I thought that was interesting. So I wanted to return to it and kind of see, like, was there anything there that could have tipped me off, like, much earlier, because I didn't remember it making any sort of lasting impression on me. And there's a lot of arguments within the online autism community about whether, you know, distinctions should even be made between the functioning levels or support needs, which is what they call it now, sort of updated terminology, because Asperger's used to be like a separate diagnosis that was like essentially autism with no like cognitive or language delays. Then a lot of people felt there were problems with like Aspies thinking they're superior to the rest of people on the autism spectrum, or them being seen as the worthwhile autistics and the rest of them like just kind of, you know, ableist junk. So they decided to just label it the spectrum. And so the reason a lot of people argue, who still use that label, argue that the distinction is important because the experiences are so vastly different. And I would tend to agree with that, but I don't agree with, obviously, Aspie supremacy. Like, we're not better, we're not the future of human evolution because we're autistic. We're a natural part of human diversity and should be allowed to exist and accepted as we are. That holds true for anywhere you are on the spectrum. So yeah, what I said about it was, I know I've read this before years ago, but don't remember it making much of an impression the first time or coming away with a good understanding of what exactly autism was. As it's a spectrum, this boy's non-speaking experience cannot be generalized and may be hard to understand, but it's insight nonetheless. So yeah, I'm not sure if they're calling it non-speaking or non-verbal now. The terminology is constantly changing and updating. That's perhaps one reason that I didn't connect with it as much as somebody who's sort of always been hyperlexic, hyperverbal, although I do think I struggle with expression and speaking in live conversation a lot more than probably comes across to a camera, because it's a one-sided monologue, which is essentially the thing that I'm built for. I don't have to read or respond to you. I can keep my train of thought. It was interesting, if a difficult read to get through. And I think I also may have checked out. I think this author has a second book now, and they're somewhat more grown up, and the way he described the guilt at not being able to perceive time as well or function as well, or being a burden on other people, that was kind of heartbreaking. I think it was his mom specifically, and just the way that he describes that the passage of time differs for him. And he's a great writer, and it really shows that just because someone is non-speaking or non-verbal doesn't mean they don't have the same level of intelligence. But I think because we overvalue in society the ability to speak, a lot of times these people get overlooked and underestimated. So I think that was a great thing to see, but I did struggle and I didn't finish the second book. The next one I read is called How to Be Human, An Autistic Man's Guide to Life, and this was just kind of chilling in the general like autism section that they had in the library. So I decided to pick it up. Looks like I gave it 2.5 stars, so I obviously wasn't super impressed. I think I found it difficult to get through, but I sort of forced myself. And this was about a guy who was going to college and like his different experiences there. And one of the things I found fascinating was how he talked about his struggle to put the concepts and things in his mind into words, that he almost has to translate it into language before he can then relay that language to other people, which isn't something I found super relatable. Like, I don't think I have the super visual interior sort of mindscape that a lot of autistics describe. Mine is more like a constant feed of like chatter and like verbal thoughts, and like I hear a lot of like talking and words and language in my mind. I wouldn't say I necessarily think in pictures, but I have seen the tendency for a lot of autistics, apparently they think in pictures, and so it's harder for them to use language in the ways that we might think of. And obviously like Temple Grandin had her whole book thinking in pictures, which I haven't read, but so it's one of the kind of the I feel like one of the more well-known things about autism, if you're just reading like the popular books, is like a lot of us tend to think in pictures, but I don't feel that that's the primary way in which I think. So it was interesting to hear him describe that, but not, again, I didn't see really any of my experience reflected here. Next one I read, I think I listened to on audio, and I gave this one 4 stars, so I really, really liked it and would recommend it. And I said, this book made me feel good about my brain for once. And considering how much negative, misguided feedback is heaped upon and internalized by undiagnosed autistics, of which there are many, over a lifetime, that's a very, very good thing. The audiobook narrator was amazing. Again, I really enjoyed this one. It basically talks about how autistics their brains are more naturally wired for systematizing, which is sort of understanding how systems work, and sort of more in that, what people think of as that like STEM areas, like science, technology, some engineering, mathematics. There we go. But yeah, they've basically studied it, and a lot of people who work in the engineering and mathematics fields are more likely to have children who are autistic, probably because they themselves have a lot of autistic traits. And so that's very, very fascinating. So in this book, he just kind of argues that autistics are very, very good at pattern spotting and sort of those things that involve understanding systems. I know there is some controversy over this researcher's work, and I'm not sure if it's because this idea of an autism being an extreme male brain, which is something that's been theorized. And I haven't entirely looked into like the legitimacy of all this research, so I can't say anything for certain. All I'm saying is that I enjoyed the arguments that were presented in the book. I enjoyed the book itself, but I do need to look deeper into this particular researcher because I think they're really, really well known within like autism research, but I'm not sure how up to date the conclusions in this book are. Next book I read is Unmasking Autism, which I did already post a whole long-winded ass review for, and I will link that up in the cards for anyone who's interested. Looking back at my review, I probably would have added that I don't necessarily think the onus should be on us as autistics to unmask. Like, I understand that that's one of the ways that we can prevent ourselves from having burnout and breakdowns and going through essentially what is the kind of the late diagnosed cycle that is pushing yourself until you have a mental breakdown in your mid-20s or early 20s or what have you. And then usually at that point, that's when most people will be diagnosed. Now, I experienced that and I wasn't diagnosed even though I went in for help. So yeah, that's kind of the traditional cycle that late diagnosed autistics and neurodivergent people kind of go through, is that it will take until they have a breakdown for them to be identified by the medical system. It's kind of like placing the onus for eradicating racism onto the people who are racially oppressed. So it's like saying, Black people, it's your responsibility to destroy racism in a society. Like, I don't understand why we're putting the onus on the marginalized group, which would be autistics, to unmask when it should be society that changes. Like, I do understand the unrealistic expectation that society will change and adapt and care about people who are in the minority rather than the majority. Like, I understand society operates around what the majority does and like says and feels and all that. But at the same time, it's like, why are you putting that burden onto the minority themselves? So I remember at the end of that review, I was kind of like, this conclusion really upsets me. I can't articulate why. And then thinking about it later and watching it back, I was like, oh, I can't articulate why. It's because I kind of don't agree that the burden should be entirely on us, which I don't think that's necessarily what they were saying, but that's kind of how it can feel. Next one is Pretending to be Normal, Living with Asperger's Syndrome. And I did rate this one 4 stars. So again, I would recommend it. Can't remember a whole lot about it. I think it was just kind of anecdotes of this lady's life, going through life, you know, obviously masking, not really understanding why she was different, why these confusing experiences, which was relatable to me. I remember around this time that Charlotte from Bookish Mama Blooms had asked me, I think she had a friend that she was trying to recommend some autism books for who was perhaps questioning. And so she asked me for my opinion because at this time I had been checking out pretty much every book on autism that was at my library. And so I told her at the time, I remember telling her that I'm really liking this one, really enjoying this one, because a lot of the ones I found or saw, I just kind of wasn't feeling. So yeah, Pretending to be Normal, I think this was the first book that I was like, I do relate to that, because I do feel like I'm just like, how do I be a person? Like, this stuff that just comes naturally to other people, I don't get it. I have to guess or just figure it out the hard way. So yeah, I can't remember specifics, but I feel like her experience was very relatable to me. Next one is kind of tangentially related. It's called Non-Monogamy and Neurodiversity. I gave it 3 stars, so again, just kind of meh. I read this because me and Adam opened up our relationship last year, so we are now polyamorous. Neither of us are dating anyone else right now, but still, it stands. So I said, it's good, but too short. I expected it to go into more detail, but there were a few really good bits. One way this could be expanded: interviews with actual neurodivergent couples or solo ethical non-monogamous practitioners. Even some of the author's own experience would have been nice to include. I see lots online about how to manage in couples where one party is neurodivergent, not so much neurodivergent couples/groups. So bringing in that focus would have been great. So it looks like it had some critiques for the author. If I remember correctly, it was a very, very short book. so a fast listen. And then we have May Tomorrow Be Awake on poetry, autism, and our neurodiverse future. And again, I gave this one 4 stars, so I would recommend it. And this was a very interesting read. It did take me a while to get through, but I really enjoyed it. It's essentially a teacher who works with people with autism or autistic people to help them articulate poetry. And some of them may have various levels of speaking ability, and it shows you their actual poetry, and he describes his story of working with them, and since he's neurodivergent himself, and it was just beautiful. He kind of talks about how poetry as a medium lends itself to autistics, like the precision, just the level of thought, the depth of thought, and how somebody who's perhaps, nonverbal can write a beautiful poem if given the proper tools and time and patience, and they're listened to and understood by someone. And so reading a lot of their poems were really amazing. So that was really awesome to see as somebody who has always loved and enjoyed and written poetry. Okay, the final book I finished is called Connecting with the Autism Spectrum: How to Talk, How to Listen, and Why You Shouldn't Call It High Functioning. And I said, this was good. Nothing I didn't already know, but always enjoy hearing the life experiences of other late identified peeps. Wish there had been more discussion of preferring certain forms of communication over others. I can't be the only one who finds written communication easier. I imagine for others it may be different. So I don't have a star rating for that one since I just kind of posted on Instagram about a bunch of books on autism I was reading at the time, many of which I didn't end up finishing. But yeah, it looks like my experience overall was positive, and as you can see, one of my primary motivations for reading this year was to get more information about autism. So yeah, that's the summary of the very, very few books that I read this year. I did change my channel name to The Thrift Punk for a while because I thought that I was going to make like thrifting and styling stuff, and I still kind of want to mix some of that in and do some of that, but I'm also thinking about reading more of my original poems on this channel. I've done it once before, and people seem to enjoy it, and just getting back into writing. So I did change the channel name back. As I said, I still want to do thrifting stuff, but just kind of make it a variety and whatever I feel like doing rather than trying to relegate it to one thing or the other, because I may not always have time to read. I may not always feel like thrifting, and I also don't want to be a really like materialist channel where all I'm doing is buying stuff and showing you that I bought stuff. And I follow a lot of channels that I just get kind of tired of them because that's all that they do. And it seems like people get really popular and famous off of not really doing much, just kind of being a generically attractive white girl and buying a bunch of stuff repeatedly that it seems like they don't need because they already have a full closet, and then showing it. And I really don't want to be one of those channels. Like, I'm very much a person who I don't want to have any more than I need, although I do have a pretty decent collection of clothing because I enjoy clothing, I enjoy styling, I enjoy aesthetics, I enjoy just, for example, this very, very soft sort of jacket thing that I have on. I don't know. I think maybe it's velvet. But anyways, so I do have an extensive collection, but I don't want to ever own more things that I need or own things that I don't use or wear, if that makes sense. So I don't want to base my whole channel around thrifting. And also just felt like The Thrift Punk is a good name, but I don't know that the punk in it, like I'm not necessarily a punk, and I feel like people could misunderstand it, and I don't know. So I just kind of went back to She Wants Addiction for the time being. That's kind of what it is. That's what's been going on. That's kind of my plan for the new year. I guess just more chill, more casual, more unmasked. Not that I haven't always kind of been unmasked to an extent, even before I understood what masking was on this channel, but just not forcing myself to do this thing. I have been looking, I feel like, off to the side for this entire video. So yeah, that's what it is. Hope you all are doing well. Hope your holidays are well, regardless of whether you care about them or not. Apparently, autistics not caring about holidays is very, very common. And I laughed when I heard that because I don't know, never had much of a holiday spirit. I've always loved like 4th of July. I think it's because of the visual like stems of the fireworks and getting to like set something off and actively do something. Also really loved gift giving, although I didn't get to do much of that this year, but wrapping it and picking out things for people and getting their reaction, like I really, really enjoy that. But yeah, so I'm gonna stop rambling. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.